Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to the webinar series that we've been hosting on the impact of technology in the post-COVID era. Today, we are extremely excited to have a leading light, a person who speaks about the rise of digital in our everyday life. I'm very happy to introduce Bhaskar Chakravorti, who is the Dean of Global Business at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at the Tufts University. He's also the founding executive director of Fletcher's Institute for Business in the Global Context. Among other things, the Institute's objectives are to connect the world of business with the world. At the Institute, Bhaskar has launched multiple initiatives, and the one I'm specifically going to talk about is the Digital Planet, this being a conversation around the rise of digital in the post-COVID era. In addition, Bhaskar also serves on the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on innovation and entrepreneurship, so extremely insightful for startups like us. He's also an advisory board member at the UNDP's International Center for the Private Sector and Development. Prior to Fletcher, Bhaskar was a partner at McKinsey & Company on the faculty of Harvard Business School and a distinguished scholar at MIT's Digilytics Center. Bhaskar, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Arindom. Glad to be here and thank you for having me on.
Thank you. So Bhaskar, as you know, we've been talking a lot to people about the rise of digital and the impact that technology is having in our everyday lives, but specifically around what was happening in the pre-COVID era, what's happening right now, and what's likely going to happen in business and everyday life with the use of digital. And it'd be great to kick off the conversation, just hear your views on the key trends which you're seeing. You obviously have traveled the world and you work in different economies. Just your view on where you see digital going in society and in various economies.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for kind of setting the table for a really interesting conversation, Arindom. Just by way of background, I run an initiative called the Digital Planet. And as part of that initiative, what we are doing is we are tracking 90 countries around the world and trying to understand how they are making the transition from a physical past to a digital future. And so there are a number of different facets of that journey that we have been mapping for the last 10 years. And it's really interesting the patterns that are showing up in certain parts of the world and how those patterns vary when you go from North America to Europe to Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and so on and so forth. And of course, there's a lot to talk about, right, in terms of what was happening on the digital planet pre-COVID. There was so much going on. There was so much, kind of on the so-called good and optimistic side, and there was so much on in terms of the not so good and worrisome side. So on the former, there was an enormous amount of excitement and enthusiasm around the data that was accumulating in different parts of the world and different systems, and how that data itself could become the fuel for the next generation of digital technologies in enhancing efficiencies, productivity, and enhancing human intelligence with artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence, creeping into practically every aspect of our lives, and potentially, making our lives, somewhat more productive, more effective, and enhancing the power of human power and hopefully improving the states of our lives. Now, simultaneously, there was, and of course, in addition to data itself being a powerful force for enhancing products and services, there was also a lot of excitement about how technology itself could become a force for automating a number of routine things that we would do as human beings, whether it is driving cars or operating machines. So, and I can keep going. There's so much that was happening on the digital front across the, across so many different industries. And then and on the kind of the less optimistic and worrisome side, the other side of data is this enormous growing concern about the data being accumulated within certain, shall we say, very large organizations on which we had very little oversight, visibility, and governance. And those organizations could range from the big technology giants like Facebook and Google in the United States to Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent in China, to other major organizations around the world, and of course governments around the world. And these are all gigantic organizations, both in the public and private sector, that have access to an enormous amount of information about regular citizens. And without governance and transparency, there is a concern about how this data is likely to be used, and they're likely to be used or abused by organizations that don't have enough governance. So, with this kind of a mixed bag of perspectives on the state of the digital planet, we were going right into 2020, and bam, history intervened in this form of the pandemic. And suddenly the world was put on pause. And guess what? What happens next? Well, anybody who is not on the front lines of either saving lives or trying to figure out a treatment for COVID-19, or preparing food or delivering food, or helping us buy food in grocery stores or in drugstores and pharmacies, everybody else retreated to their living rooms, literally, and flipped open their laptops and phones. And that was the only tether that they had to the economy. So suddenly the entire planet was the digital planet. We were literally operating universities, companies, government agencies like video games in front of a computer screen. Now just imagine, it's almost even a science fiction movie couldn't have kind of got us to this point, but here we are. And so from our perspective, we would not have wished for a pandemic on us at all. However, now that it is here, we're kind of saying, look, this is almost the purest test of the internet imaginable. It's the purest test of what digital technologies can or cannot do, what are the limitations, and what are the strengths, and what are we learning from it. So I can keep going, of course, but let me just kind of pause.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So if I just stop you there, and so what you're saying is that, contrary to popular belief that the crisis may have stopped economic activity with a digital sort of rider on it, economic activity continued in work from home and in other parts, obviously not at the same level, but the ability to collect data, because everybody was now doing it digitally, suddenly shot up. And so understanding trends and behaviors and consumer behaviors was much, much more impactful, because there was no sort of offline noise, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. So today, say you and I are having this conversation, we might have imagined a situation where you might have traveled to Boston, or I might have visited London, and we could have had this face-to-face in front of a room of people, right? But we are doing this digitally, and this is accumulating on a server somewhere. So we have indeed added to that corpus of data just through this act, right? And we're doing this every minute, every second of the day. So it has indeed enhanced the volume of data, not just the volume, but also the quantity and quality of data in every aspect, simply because we have transplanted face-to-face, the face-to-face economy and many aspects of the physical economy with the data economy.
And that is so exciting, because I don't know how you're seeing the next sort of 18 to 24 months and beyond go, but in the industry that we work in, which is financial services, recording conversations and recording information was absolutely critical to compliance. Mm-hmm. And now that people are starting to do that digitally, in working from home, one way or the other, that getting that compliance is so much easier. Do you see that as a continuing trend, or do you see the likes of new ways to fraud the system and to defraud the system slowly creeping in, so that digital now needs to become even more intelligent to be able to counter that?
Yeah, so the analogy I would use, Arindom, is building a house, right? So if you
Right.
build a small house, it has a few doors and windows, and it looks kind of modest. And the burglars out there, they kind of look at a small house and say, "Nah, I'm just going to leave this alone." And there's probably not too much by way of treasure to be robbed inside there. And of course, the number of entry points into the house are also few. But as you start building a bigger and bigger edifice, there are more doors and windows in this house. And from the outside, it looks like, wow, there's so much in here. And that's exactly the same analogy I would use for the data corpus that is accumulating all over the world, right? So the more data we have, of course, there is more treasure to be mined by the good people who are inside the house. But there's also more treasure to be mined by the bad actors on the outside. And there are more doors and windows. There are more ways to kind of get into the system. And of course, we know that the cyber security systems around this data infrastructure is not leak-proof. These systems are vulnerable, and the bigger the edifice is, the vulnerability just grows. Of course, we continue to enhance our technologies for improving those security. The infrastructure continues to get reinforced, but it's always a game of playing catch up with the miscreants on the outside who can get in. So I think it's both, the good and the bad sort of rising at the same time. And of course, one hopes that there are enough security systems redundancies and resiliencies that one builds in. But of course, we've seen, for instance, meetings and conferences surged around the world on the single platform that we are on right now, which is Zoom. And initially, Zoom was a very powerful platform to get on because it was so easy to use. And part of that ease of use was through a trade-off. And the trade-off was Zoom, initially its security systems weren't that good. So in the first few weeks of use of Zoom, there was a surge of kind of Zoom bombing and breaches of security and privacy, and which they've started to kind of play catch up on and patch the systems here and there. But these systems are still vulnerable.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I think from your industry's perspective, it's good news and bad news as these things go. And that's going to be the state of affairs forever. And this is how the digital economy is going to be. And this is true of the physical economy as well. When it's the physical economy is the house that we build. And the bigger the house it is, the more vulnerable it is going to be. And you've got to put in security systems to keep the bad people out.
It's a great example of an unintended consequence of the rise of digital and data, and what we specialize in is merging some of the old world and some of the offline sort of techniques with the new digital techniques. And because we use so much AI, the ability to still use, let's say, documents which are which hold water from a legal standpoint, instead of just pure digital feeds around mortgage lending or any other forms of lending. That provides a very good balance between trying to deal with all of the unintended consequences of cyber crime versus the well-established ways of documented evidence. Let me just take you forward, and I know you speak very passionately about this. One of the other unintended consequences of digital has been this growing divide between the rich and the poor. Mm-hmm. If you think about it from a country economic standpoint, or even if you think about markets like the US and UK, there is a divide and a growing divide. Would you like to throw some light on how you expect digital to either exacerbate or diminish the divide between the rich and poor?
Yeah, absolutely. Such a great question. And as it turns out, just before the pandemic hit, I launched another major initiative underneath the Digital Planet initiative. And this one is called Imagining a Digital Economy for All. and it handily reduces to an acronym which spells out IDEA. So it's IDEA 2030. And our notion was by 2030, we'd like to get some threshold of inclusion in terms of the reach of the digital economy. Now, if you step back and think about the degree to which the digital world has penetrated the global population. Now, I'm thinking about this at a global level. Of course, we can go to individual regions and countries and so on and so forth. But at a global level, we have as many mobile phone subscriptions as there are people on the planet. Okay, so now that is a pretty staggering figure. Now that, of course, doesn't translate into everybody having access to a phone in their hand. But still, just that one-to-one mapping of the number of subscriptions with the number of people on the planet suggests that this is a human invention that has penetrated like no other in human history. So we have more people with phones than people with access to clean water, than people with access to a toilet. Okay, so clean water and toilet is sold not last century, but the century before. And we're looking at mobile phones as being far more penetrated. Or if you think about countries that have some of the most significant levels of poverty, or regions with the most significant levels of poverty are South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. In South Asia alone, in India alone, in just the last 3 years, we've had a massive surge in terms of access to the mobile phone. And Sub-Saharan Africa, similar, not the same steep gradient in terms of the surge, but still a surge, right? And the other thing that is happening with populations in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, these are demographically the youngest populations in the world. And young people are very quick at adapting to these new technologies, and most of these young people are underemployed, they're underskilled, they have a lot of time on their hands. You give them a mobile phone, they can play with it for a few hours and they can get on to using it in a very clever, skillful way, much better than you and I or many of our generational colleagues cannot. So what that means is we have now given access to technology to a lot of people, and in the pandemic, everybody's relying on these technologies. Now, even though we have access to the mobile phone, that doesn't necessarily translate into equal access. And just to take an example, far away from Sub-Saharan Africa, far away from South Asia, let's look at the United States, the largest economy in the world, arguably the richest society in the world. And it is an extremely unequal country in terms of digital access. And it's unequal for a number of reasons, not the least of which being the fact that broadband access, on which we rely for all these Zoom calls and streaming movies in the evenings when we are done with all our meetings, is very expensive. The United States has the most expensive broadband access anywhere in the world. And the broadband access itself is patchy. There are many parts of the United States. The state of Maine, for instance, has some of the worst internet access. Many parts of the state, you can't get on the internet. So just imagine the unequal nature of the distribution of digital access, which then translates into a loss in terms of productivity because people can't join these calls and continue to stay tethered to the economy. People have their children at home because the schools are shut. So the children aren't getting the education that they need. So this is a transgenerational problem, which is then being magnified. The poorer parts of a metropolitan area or the rural areas in the United States, which also is true for where you are in the United Kingdom, have poorer access. So there's an unequal level of access there. And then a lot of the population that used to be in service jobs or manufacturing jobs, so the inequality also manifests in the nature of jobs we have. So the kinds of work that I do or you do or others in the knowledge sector do can readily be done, substituted for on the digital platform. I can open my laptop, I can, it's not the same thing as going into a classroom and teaching, but I can do something close to it on screen. Now, if I'm in meat packing, I can't open my laptop and chop meat, right? So people in a certain socioeconomic stratum are potentially being laid off, or they're being exposed to the pandemic. And so the digital divide is playing out in a number of different ways, either because I have poor access, or my job doesn't allow me to use a digital technology, or I have expensive access to the internet, which means no access. And so it's just compounding social inequalities. And I'll just say one more thing, and then I'll be quiet. The other aspect of the pandemic is that we are, of course, going through an economic downturn, the likes of which we have not seen in our generation, and it is going to surpass the Great Depression. And in order to stave that off, governments around the world, our government here in the United States has got relief checks, stimulus relief checks that are supposedly going out to people. And of course, where you start is from the bottom of the economic pyramid. Now, if I'm at the bottom of the economic pyramid, I have poor digital access. I have not filed tax returns, or I definitely have not filed tax returns electronically. And I have not got a bank account that is electronically connected, or I have very little connection with the formal financial system. I may not have a credit history. I don't have all the, that long digital trail that people at the upper end of the socioeconomic pyramid have. So I can't get loans, I can't get credit, I can't get, I'm not on the government record. So what ends up happening is that when the government is sending out stimulus relief checks, I'm the last one in the queue, even though I'm the person who needs it the most. Poor digital access translates into not only poverty on all those other fronts, but also poverty in terms of stimulus relief. So this is just a problem that is compounding all over. And unfortunately, the digital tether has created an even greater sense of inequality than what we had going into the pandemic. And of course, we've seen this inequality playing a major role in terms of our socio-political systems. You've had Brexit in the United Kingdom. We've had, frankly, a disastrous election in 2016 here in the United States, an outcome of these inequalities. So I'll just stop it there.
No, I think it's
so
an
much more to
excellent
talk
point.
about.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, and we see a lot of that in our industry also around lending. But the one sort of bright ray of sunshine into this is that we've just been awarded the Player of the Year for diversity and inclusivity, because what we are doing is, because we use documents as well as digital, and we use intelligent digital to process mortgage and other kinds of loans, and we are able to do it cheaper and quicker, people who don't necessarily have a digital footprint are still able to provide these documents, and we are able to process it. So providing credit to the underprivileged or the vulnerable sections of the society is actually being helped by our technology and our product. So intelligent digital, while at a broader scale it may be exacerbating the divide, I think in some ways it is actually helping reach out and give credit to sections which earlier were not able to get the credit.
Mm-hmm.
One final thing, just conscious of time, Bhaskar, and your time, I think one other very, very important dimension of intelligent digital and use of all of this AI technology and digital technology is the impact it's having on the environment. Mm. And yet again, there are sort of two schools of thought. The one school which says, because of all of the intelligent digital technologies, people are able to transact without meeting face to face, so travel comes down. The use of paper, as an example, is significantly coming down because using technology like ours, you don't need to print, you can extract information straight away from documents. On the other hand, technology has its own sort of server farms, massive data centers, which create consume a huge amount of energy. Where do you see digital sitting in this war or this campaign against climate change?
Yeah, great question. I think, of course, we've all witnessed a reversal in terms of the our contribution to the carbon in the environment around the world. And we've also seen pictures from my home city, New Delhi, where just even a year back, you could not see any of the major buildings
Yes.
in the heart of the city. And today it's crystal clear. There are parts of India where you can actually see mountains that nobody had ever seen in their lifetimes. So, this is a temporary pause on our continuing devastation of the environment, unfortunately temporary. Because yes, I think digital technology does give you the ability to do things electronically, and yes, it does then go into the data goes into a server farm, which is sort of has its own environmental footprint. But net, there is an environmental benefit in transplanting physical activity with digital activity. There's so many different ways in which one can think about, okay, how much of this shift in behavior is temporary versus it becomes a muscle that we then will continue to use, post-pandemic, whenever that comes. And one interesting question to probably use as a litmus test is this whole work from home phenomenon, because in many ways, that is going to be one of the most critical contributors to climate change. So you think about what the digital industry did in the first place was it was one of the biggest contributors to emissions, partly because we created these superclusters of cities. In fact, in the United States, there are literally 5 cities, Boston, San Francisco, San Jose, Seattle, and San Diego, which became the clusters of digital activity. And did I mention New York? I should have mentioned New York.
Yeah.
So, a handful of cities that became the clusters where all digital work and digital innovation was happening. So what that led to was also congestion and rising housing prices and so on and so forth, right? Now, it's a bit of a paradox, because if you think about digital activity, was meant to translate into the depth of distance, and you could pretty much do that kind of work anywhere. Instead, all that digital activity created a lot of clustering, and we saw companies building these magnificent headquarters and just drawing people into these highly congested spaces, creating both an environmental challenge and socioeconomic challenges. Now, what has happened is, as we went through the pandemic window, everybody's working from home, and companies like Facebook are saying, well, this is going to be a permanent state for at least 50% of our employees. It's not just Facebook, it's Twitter, it's JP Morgan, it's companies across the board are seeing, that people can be just as productive. In fact, there have been some studies under certain conditions. If you give people the right space, the right access, they're more productive working at home, and provided the children can be sent to school at the right time and so on and so forth. So we're beginning to maybe see a turn towards more of a hybrid work environment, where people are not necessarily going to be going into the office and thereby commuting and thereby adding to congestion in cities, and potentially not even flying for meetings and conferences. And that transcontinental flights, as we know, have some of the biggest carbon footprints anyway. So there is going to be a potential drop in terms of face-to-face meetings that lasts beyond the pandemic. And we will see an environmental impact of that. I think I'm not a work from home utopian, where a lot of people are kind of saying, well, all those employees of Facebook are now just going to go to they're going to go to rural Wyoming and they're just going to work from there because it's cheaper there. That's not really going to happen. There's still an attraction to being in the Bay Area, and maybe people are going to go to rural Wyoming or Colorado or wherever for the short term, and they will come back. So we are going to see perhaps some increase in terms of distance working, which then translates into a lower kind of an environmental impact. And I think that is going to be the primary contribution of the pandemic to the environment, and a certain amount of slowing down of our march towards continuing to add to the climate challenges. But it's just only a certain amount of slowing down. I think this break is only temporary.
That's wonderful. Well, Bhaskar, excellent conversation. Unfortunately, we're out of time. If I may just finally recap, then I hope you agree with this. The rise of intelligent digital is inexorable. We're seeing it during the COVID crisis. We're going to see more of this as the crisis comes. There are significant benefits of it, but there are some unintended consequences. But overall, on balance, I think digital and digital is certainly going to help the economy and the society. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your time. It's been wonderful speaking to you, and hopefully we can have more of these conversations in the months to come.
Great. Thank you for having me, Arindom. Good seeing you.
Okay. Take care now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay well.